Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and today we're going to be talking about heroes and villains, particularly the supernatural kind. And my guest today is Michelle Crowley. Michelle, welcome, and tell us a little bit about why you're uniquely qualified to talk about heroes and villains here tonight.
Well, my unique qualifications fall under the category of I've done my research, and my master's thesis was on villains and our being the culture, our interaction with them, and how our villains are going to change, and how they better reflect what's going on in the world.
And that sounds like a terrific lead-in to talk about some of the heroes and villains in Supernatural. Who are some of your favorite villains from Supernatural?
I love the Princes of Hell, and I wish they had a better story arc. I want to know more about Asmodeus and Dagon and Ramiel, instead of just their small little, they were kind of the place filler villains instead of Lucifer or Crowley or someone like that.
Boy, I agree with you on that one. I mean, Asmodeus got a fair amount of screen time, but Ramiel got one episode and Dagon got a couple, but not very long compared to the screen time that other people got. And I agree. I was really fascinated with them. I guess Abaddon counted as one of them as well. And she got a couple of episodes, but still, they really could have been a much more powerful combined bad guy, and I thought they were just really interesting. I wanted to know why Ramiel just wanted to go fishing. You could be a knight of hell, you could be a prince of hell. Why go fishing?
Yep.
Didn't seem like a guy.
Yeah, and it's kind of like with, especially with the theological background of the Princes of Hell and the whole story and the lore associated with them, to have Asmodeus just be like I said, kind of like a placeholder. I mean, all he wanted was just more power. He was kind of the runt of the litter. He wanted more. And frankly, to me, as a viewer, wanting more is a really bad motivation for your villains. He was just like, hey, yeah, I was this weakling, and now I have an opportunity to be more powerful, and now I'm taking it. And yeah, like with Ramiel, why does he want to go fishing? Why does he want to? Why doesn't he want more power? Why is he just willingly giving up his, I guess, birthright to the throne of hell?
Yeah, I agree. Those were all some pretty fascinating unanswered questions, and I would have loved to have seen more of them. And why was Dagon so fascinated with the whole Lucifer's baby, devil baby mama drama? Seems terribly feminine for a prince of hell. Whole power behind the throne thing, but I'm not sure she would have needed to be the power behind the throne. So yeah, there were a lot of unanswered questions there.
And if the character was cast as a male, I wonder if it would be as unsettling or as, I don't know, what's the word, unfulfilling with Dagon. If it was a guy that was so into that baby mama drama, would there have been more motivation? Would there have been more of a connection there? But the fact that it's kind of, I mean, really, the Princes of Hell don't have a gender.
Mm-hmm.
At least in my research and how I've seen things, they don't have gender, so they could be
incorporeal being. It really doesn't have a gender, because all of the markings by which we determine gender would not be there. So any of them that would be voluntary and almost like picking clothing.
Yes. Yes. It's like, you know, they just decided I'm going to wear this meat suit today. And this meat suit happens to be what this group considers to be feminine or masculine.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. But if Asmodeus was wearing his Colonel Sanders as a female, then we may have been more satisfied with the fact that, hey, yeah, the female just wants more.
Mm-hmm.
I've just gone and created my own conundrum. I'm good at that.
So aside from the princes of hell,
Yep.
who were some of the other villains that caught your eye?
Gotta go with Crowley.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, there is kind of an in there. Any relation?
No comment. No comment. Uh, yeah, so with Crowley, we really get to see the story redemption arc of the character. And, you know, for better or for worse, you know, there's some people that would have rather seen Crowley remain the villain and remain, you know, removed from the Winchesters and always being their foil. But the fact that the story comes full circle and he ends up, he's not a good guy, but he's not a bad guy at the end. And he's definitely not motivated by evil, even though he is a demon.
Well, a number of people have pointed out that if we didn't see the story from Sam and Dean's eyes, there would be two sociopathic guys riding around the countryside killing people. You know, we wouldn't necessarily automatically see them as the heroes if we weren't seeing it from their point of view. So from that sense, yeah, Crowley kind of gets that redemption that all of the major characters have gotten, except maybe Lucifer, in you get to see them be the bad guy, then be the good guy, and kind of be in the middle, yeah. Which in certain seasons has even applied to the boys.
Yes, yes. And it's, you know, if we can look at good and evil from a philosophical standpoint, we tend to associate, you know, badness with evil, but evil is actually separate from bad. Mm-hmm. So bad is the absence of good, but evil is its own thing that is grown, is cultivated, is nurtured, and festers within us. And which is kind of interesting if we think about the empty. Mm-hmm. So the empty, what do they want to do? Go back to sleep. And
we can all relate to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. But in the empty's case, you know, it's returning to that inanimate state ties in with philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer's concept of good, evil, and bad. So bad, according to him, is just our selfish or our fanatical self-interest. So in that sense, we could consider Dean to be bad. It's definitely, especially in the earlier seasons, very egotistic, very much in his own self-interest and self-preservation. But evil, looking at it as the empty, is seeking a relief. And it is always searching for this relief. And sometimes that relief comes in killing other people. And this is just, you know, evil in general. You know, if we look at evil in our world, you know, serial killers, they just put away put the ruling on the Golden State Killer. Definitely an evil individual who just kind of kept doing these immoral and heinous acts because he felt like he had to, because he wanted to, and he was never satisfied. He was never, you know, always going out for more. So that's evil. And evil is festering and growing and just kind of makes this nasty, nasty growth within us. And all it wants to do is just die. Go back to an inanimate state. Go back to where it doesn't have to be in its own pain, in its own suffering anymore.
Numb.
And so, frankly, according to that definition, I feel like the Empty is the first villain that is evil. Every other villain in Supernatural was bad, operating in their own self-interest, operating in their own selfish desires. You know, Asmodeus wanting more power, Crowley wanting the throne of hell and to recreate hell in his hellish image of a business. Even Dick Roman, you know, the Leviathans, wanted what? What can we say the Leviathans wanted? They just kind of wanted.
They wanted people as cattle so that they'd have a sustained food supply.
Selfish interest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, self-preservation in that sense. So yeah, I think it's kind of interesting how we constantly associate bad and evil, but really they're their own separate entities, especially in storytelling and pop culture, and like we see here in Supernatural.
Well, and you know, you're right about the Empty. It's much more nihilistic in some ways than many of the other villains, because it wants an end of everything. It would run down the clock. It would end the universe just to get a good night's sleep.
And even Amara, you know, being
Yeah.
God's sister, being the darkness, she didn't even really seek destruction and nothingness. She wanted a relationship with her brother. She wanted to talk it out with him. And now that she has that satisfied, you know, she's happy shopping and causing whatever sort of chaos she is in Reno.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's just kind of like, yeah, you know, I got what I wanted, so bye.
Yeah. Yeah, she was kind of the bratty kid who threw a tantrum until they finally got what they wanted, and now they're over it, and they're off playing with their toys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and of course, we did a whole panel on Chuck. So Chuck got his own panel. We're kind of talking about everybody but Chuck in this panel tonight, just in case there's anybody out there who's waiting, well, when are they going to get to Chuck? Look it up. We already did a Chuck panel, or it will be coming. So he has one all to himself. Now, there's Lucifer, who was on stage for a lot of seasons. What's your thought about Lucifer, Nick, you know, Rick Springfield?
I take back my statement about the evil, with the Empty being the only evil one. I think Nick has the same quality as a serial killer. And it was something that was in him that through Lucifer was awoken. Just like we also saw the guy, oh gosh, I can't remember what season it was, but he was possessed and then summoned the demon to repossess him. I can't remember the season that was. But yeah, when we see the people, not the astrological beings, but the people themselves embodying that evil and taking on, you know, the murderous qualities, those are evil characters. So Nick's evil. Lucifer, kind of like Amara, was really throwing a temper tantrum because he never got what he wanted.
Yeah. Nick wanted, I mean, Lucifer wanted Daddy's attention. Lucifer didn't think he was treated fairly by Daddy, and then he got screwed over by his older brothers. So in that sense, he is much more understandable and logical. Nick no longer knew who he was when he wasn't Lucifer.
Right. And it woke up part of Nick's brain. You know, Freud gives us the ego, the super ego, and the id, and the bestial id was what was left out of Nick, and that's what Lucifer, I guess, awoken in that sense.
Well, and of course, we also have the Benders.
The Benders,
The ones who hunted people.
Oh, season 1, right?
Hillbilly.
Yeah.
Like your banjos.
The Hills Have Eyes Supernatural Edition. Yeah.
Yeah, Cabin in the Woods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't
those,
think
they were just evil.
figure
Yeah.
because they weren't hunting for food, they were hunting for sport. They weren't defending themselves. They did it because it was fun and it made them feel powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it wasn't like one or two hunts satisfied their urges. They just kept going. I mean, they needed more and more and more. And then, you know, when they caught the Winchesters, they didn't know the prize that they could have potentially had by killing them. But
Well, and you know, speaking of which, in one of the later seasons, the guy who was the FBI agent who was running the website selling off people pieces to monsters and was going to auction off Sam piece by piece, I'd say he falls in evil as well.
yeah. Yep. And all of these people that we've been talking about are people. They're not the astrological, they're not the supernatural beings. And boy, what's that what's that telling us about our lives?
Demons are crazy, people I don't get. Well,
Yep.
we even get a taste of this with the boys when we have Soulless Sam and Dean with the Mark of Cain, and then the double whammy of being Demon Dean. Again, completely divorced from any kind of morality or moral code or even conscience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. But then we see, you know, angels don't have a soul.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then at the same time, you know, are those angels bad or are they evil?
Well, there was a point when I was really willing to say Uriel was evil. But he was driven. He was the kind of fanatic that thinks that extremism in a pursuit of virtue is no vice. The end justifies the means.
And Raphael too.
Yeah. Well, and Cass in his darker moments.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially when we had when we had Godstiel. He kind of went down that rabbit hole for a while as well.
Yep.
I thought it was very interesting when we reached kind of the inflection point in the series when Sam and Dean, and of course Sam got there before Dean did, realized that just being supernatural didn't make something evil. That it was not just what you had, it was what you did with it, which is really true for people as well. And they started to see that Lenore could be a vampire, but not a monster. That Garth could be a werewolf, but not a monster. You know, I wish Dean had gotten there maybe at the beginning of season 4 and saved us all a lot of trauma. But he got there eventually, which is what matters.
Yep.
There have been so many really good villains, even if they only got an episode or two. Are there any others that immediately come to mind? Because I agree with you, some of them that are just doing things because they're hungry isn't really evil. That's kind of like having a loose grizzly bear in suburbia. It doesn't mean to be bad, it's just hungry.
Right, right. And also, we wouldn't hold the grizzly bear to the same moral code as we would a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's something else that with the monsters that also happen to be human. You know, where is that line between what is moral and what is not? And you know, does the beast excuse the morality that the human has come to accept?
Well, I'll give you another one on that one. Again, later seasons where the two brothers run the meat packing plant and they've got the god Moloch tied up in the basement and they've got to keep feeding him.
Mm-hmm.
Not too far akin from yet another late season episode where Dean's old buddy Lee has a monster tied up in the basement that he's got to keep feeding.
Yep, last call.
Mm-hmm. And in both of those cases, the people were in it for their business, for profit, not even necessarily that they needed the money, but they didn't want to give it up once they had it.
Yep. Again, there's the self-interest, the selfishness, the hallmarks of bad villains, but not necessarily an evil villain.
Yeah. Not on the same scale, certainly, as like the Benders, where there just isn't any rationality with that at all.
Right. Well, they had rationality. It was fun.
True. But I mean, not even like you could say, well, they're making a living from it. Not that that would have made it any better. But now, what about the collector, Sinclair Cuthbert? The guy who wanted to collect Dean.
Ooh.
And he kept a zoo of supernatural creatures, which is certainly, you know, kidnapping.
Mm-hmm. And immoral.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
He was another guy that I thought could have been really interesting had he stuck around. He reminded me a lot of a character in Simon R. Green's Nightside series, who is called the Collector. And it's a very similar character. He has a hidden base where he keeps all of his collections, some of which are still alive. And that's what he lives for. He lives to acquire and to collect and have the unique thing.
I wonder if, they wouldn't have taken care of Sinclair if he would have become in later seasons. We have Castiel's friend, Sergei.
Uh-huh.
I wonder if he would have been a character like that they call, they don't necessarily get along with them, but they call in when they need assistance or, a little bit of extra muscle or something.
Well, that's that whole category we were talking about beforehand about frenemies. Mm-hmm. Crowley was a frenemy. You couldn't always trust him, but he did come through some of the time if the self-interest aligned.
Yeah.
Rowena became a frenemy, if not by the end more of a friend, but definitely a frenemy by the time it was all over.
Yes. Yes.
And yeah, I could see in the same way, Castiel and Sergei is just an odd combination, no matter how you cut it. But yeah, I could see the Collector having become something like that. One of those questionable sources that isn't that unlike an undercover cop having informants.
Yep.
Meg was another.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that, having the cop as your informant, we can talk about Jody.
Mm-hmm.
So, when Jody was introduced, she wasn't necessarily, she was a foil for Bobby Singer, but then she, came over to the Hunter side of things and became their, they put out an APB on Jack, and she was able to put that through the system, and their connections with, and then Donna, so they're, the Winchester's picking up these connections into the police force.
The one I always wanted to see come back again, and it's on my mind because in my Supernatural TFWNC group, we're doing a rewatch of the 75 most essential episodes for Supernatural as we're counting down to fall and hopefully the remaining part of season 15. And one of the ones that we just watched was the Benders. And the cop in that, whose brother had been taken by them, and she shoots the father. She shot him, not because he was trying to escape, but because he had it coming, and he killed her brother. And I don't think anybody doubted that it was right for her to shoot him, even if it wasn't legal for her to shoot him. I would have loved to have seen her show up at that sheriff's convention they had.
Yes. Yeah.
Which
and then they'd be comparing notes with, wait a minute, these guys were agents. No, they're park rangers. No, they're,
which is interesting because the sheriff's convention was in Hibbing, Minnesota, which is where the Benders were. I didn't realize that until I'm watching the Benders going, wait, Hibbing 911? Just a second, why isn't she there?
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, missed opportunity there on their side.
Probably wasn't available. But,
Yeah.
Another frenemy that we have there is Meg.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like Rowena, that ended up being more of a friend when, as she left. But yeah, especially when Meg was first introduced back in season 1. Her being, the culture of Supernatural back during season 1, of course, being very misogynistic, very much, women are eye candy. We take men seriously kind of
there
idea.
Are women, there are eye candy, and then there are she-devils. You kind of got to in one of those.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, when we had Meg 1.0 show up, and again, very much out for herself, even though we knew she had an evil daddy somewhere, the person that was kind of pulling the strings, but we didn't know who it was.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing her acting on her own, essentially on her own, to lure Sam and try to what were they, the Zoroastrian daemons. She calls those up. So, but yeah, I don't know. I would have liked to see more of season 1 Meg throughout season 2 and season 3. Have her show up more and get to know that particular Meg's motivation.
Yeah, I love Rachel Miner. I love, the Meg 2.0. I love Meg Steele and all of that. But you're right. There was a softening there that came with Meg 2.0, where Meg 1.0 was definitely more evil. And it's interesting, we kind of went the opposite direction with Ruby. I would have said that Ruby 1.0, Katie Cassidy, was less, I don't know, she seemed to be, to me, more believably trying to help them, even though, of course, she wasn't, where I never really bought Genevieve Cortese, Genevieve Padalecki's Ruby. I always saw her as trouble from a mile away, and maybe that's a female thing.
Yeah. And like with Meg 1.0, Nikki Acox was she was trouble with a capital T, from the way she acted, the way she dressed, the hair cut short, and she definitely came on as a powerhouse. And then when the character comes back as Rachel Miner, she softened, even though in both cases they went from blonde to brunette.
But I would have said that Ruby got harder with 2.0 going to Genevieve. There was just something to me that seemed harder in the second Ruby than had been in the first. The first Ruby I was kind of willing to trust. Second Ruby, I never bought it.
I think that's why I'm very much not a fan of how they had that story arc go with Sam and Ruby, because I feel like that Sam would have connected more with Ruby 1.0 than Ruby 2.0. So
well,
I just think,
go ahead.
I just think that the type of person that we saw Sam as at that point, I think he would have been much more willing to go with the girl next door than the
hot stuff next door.
Yeah.
Well, the only difference being Ruby 1.0 was before Dean died.
Mm.
And Ruby 2.0 was when Sam was a mess. And I think he would have grabbed any life preserver in the lake at that point.
Yeah, and that's ultimately probably why he, it didn't matter what body she was in. He
Although
just,
it worked out very well for Jared in the long run.
yep. You know, personal lives aside, I'm talking about story here.
Which has kind of gotten into some of what we've talked about before, earlier, off camera, about the female versus the male villains. And it's interesting, probably the only seductive male villain would have been the Siren.
Yeah.
Otherwise known as White from True Blood.
Yep. But that's also just the nature of the Siren. I mean, even, you know, you see them in Odyssey as women, but you know, taking them as this mythological creature, not necessarily tied to a gender. You know, it's the Siren's job to be seductive and, you know, pulling on the things that you want most or whatnot. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other seductive who was the guy with the snake in season 14?
Guy with the snake.
Yeah.
The one who hired them to go in after the stuff at the collectors? It was kind of a minor demon who got killed.
No, it's the snake that Jack takes.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember. But that does bring up somebody else who became an interesting villain, and that was Gordon.
Yeah.
I still don't know how Sam killed him with the razor wire without getting vamp blood in his hands when he wasn't wearing gloves. I just don't get that, but we'll let it go.
Demon blood. Blame the demon blood.
There you go. But Gordon was definitely somebody who went, and Kubrick, his kind of protege, aptly named, kind of went down the rabbit hole for vengeance and extremism.
Yeah.
So they were interesting. And then I know we were tossing this around a little beforehand, but there's always Bella.
Yes. Definitely acting within her own interest. And she, you know, how do you sleep at night? What is it? Naked on silk sheets rolling in money or something like that. Definitely out for her own interest. But turned out kind of to be a frenemy at the end.
Well, and in some ways had kind of gotten into it the same way Dean got into his deal, with, you know, she made a deal to save somebody else.
Yeah. So acting on non-selfish interest. But then she just gave into that id and said, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna die anyway. I might as well.
I'm gonna die and I'm going to hell anyway. I might as well have the game as well as the name.
Yeah.
Which is actually kind of understandable in the long run.
Yeah, I don't know what I'd do in that situation. My fate is sealed. How much fun can I have before the end?
I have been finding the same kind of thing since at the time we're taping this, we're all, you know, on lockdown with the pandemic. And I find myself saying, should I have that extra piece of cake? Well, if we all die tomorrow, do I want to realize I didn't have the extra piece of cake? There is something about that does weigh against your motivation. Yeah,
it's the same thing. Honestly, earlier today, I was looking for a new pair of Birkenstocks, and I'm like, okay, those are $120. Am I going to regret buying those? No, absolutely not. I mean, it's a photo op, but I'm not going to any cons. So.
Oh, Birkenstocks will last you for 20 years. Really amortize that. There's nothing to feel guilty about that.
Yeah. My current pair has had quite a life, and so it's like, yeah, I've had them for about 12 years at this point. So yeah, I'm for a new one.
But getting back to villains, you mentioned postmodern villains.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what that means, and then maybe whether or not it connects with supernatural.
All right, so this was the topic of my master's thesis when I wrote it years ago. And looking at how in more recent times we've had a big resurgence of this redemption story of the villain. So we've had a lot of movies come out of justifying the bad guy. Even Disney. So Elsa, going into the first Frozen movie, she's evil. Well, okay, she's not good, but the entire story looks at why she is that way. In contrast to, let's go back to the 1930s when we had villains that were bad for the sake of being bad. The Wicked Witch of the West. We don't have her motivation. Yeah, house landed on her sister, but obviously she was pretty evil before then because she already had the title of the Wicked Witch of the West. So this postmodern villain is where we find ourselves now in this era of these villain redemption stories and redemption arcs. And with The Wizard of Oz, we had Wicked. Not necessarily the book, but the smash Broadway play hit that would still be playing in the Gershwin Theater in New York. And we see the story behind the Wicked Witch. It really wasn't her fault. It was some bad PR, and she made the wrong people angry. And completely changing the entire cultural story of The Wizard of Oz. So when we have these current movies and current pop culture artifacts and shows and whatnot, giving us the backstory as to why these classic villains are the way they are. Star Wars. Mm-hmm. Same way. The episodes 1, 2, and 3 shows us why Anakin turned to the dark side, explaining the whole faceless, masked, giant, powerful, dark, evil force that was Darth Vader. And the thing is about these villains, and we can do this now looking at it from a pop culture study point of view, is that we can look back and see just what that villain is an embodiment of in the culture. So in the 1930s, this is pre-war, we're seeing evil for the sake of being evil. We didn't have the luxury of knowing why all of this stuff was going on with the Wicked Witch, just like we didn't have the luxury of knowing what was going on with the fascist states in Europe. 1970s rolls along, we're having this big entrepreneurial boom, and these new companies and new powers are taking control, and they're large, they're faceless, they're dark and looming, like Darth Vader. And then 2000s rolls along, and like with the Federation in the original the prequels, Star Wars episodes 1, 2, and 3. Big business is here. They're taking over. They're in control. And then we look at maybe the government's a bit corrupt. The government's not as good as we thought it was. And now, 2000s, 2005, current time, this post 9/11, we want to know more about these people that we've already accepted as bad. And that's where the postmodern villain comes from. So we're this era of why do you want me to believe that Darth Vader is bad? Why do you want me to believe that Crowley is bad? Why do you want me to believe that Bella is bad? And one of the things we're seeing throughout the 15 years of Supernatural is that everyone has a reason. And in some cases, those reasons hit really close to home for a lot of us. We're going to die anyway. Are we going to enjoy that piece of cake or buy that expensive pair of shoes? You're going to die anyway, like Bella. So why not enjoy it? And, Crowley, maybe some people can relate to his, the reason he became a demon was for a couple extra inches. But he wasn't just about that when he died. He was much more than, you know, a guy wanting to impress the ladies by the time end of season 13.
Well, and Rowena coming up from the gutter and deciding, kind of Scarlett O'Hara like, I will never be hungry again.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Ruby too.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about Ruby 1.0 before, and when she was talking about she was a witch. So,
well, and a lot of times with the villains in Supernatural, what we also have seen is a very uncomfortable dark mirror image of Sam and Dean, where it becomes an issue of a choice made or not made, family or not family. You know, the whole we keep each other human. And Dean seeing what future Dean became in the end, the episode The End, when he didn't have Sam to anchor his humanity. So I think they also were often cautionary tales for Sam and Dean on, watch out, a slight fork in the road, and you're back to being the Boy King, or you're back to being, you know, Demon Dean, and you kind of liked it. So be careful.
Yeah, and this is a common trope that we see in a lot of pop culture as well, and it originated back in with the One Bad Day comic, Killing Joke with Batman, and shows us the birth of the Joker. That it was literally just one bad day was enough to push him literally over the edge, and you know, we see that with Sam and Dean a lot. Yeah, with that in that episode, or actually throughout the first part of season 15, when Sam is seeing the visions of the other worlds, sorry, spoiler, of the other worlds, where, yeah, either Demon Dean took over, or, like you said, the Boy King was in power and took over Sam. But yeah, so this whole concept of one bad day, and that we all live on this precipice, that what's going to be the final straw that's going to break our sanity, that's going to break our morality, and we give into those bestial, evil urges.
Yeah. So if you had to pick a favorite villain, who would it be?
I hate picking favorites. My favorite villain from a villain standpoint, or my favorite villain from a character standpoint?
Either or both.
All right, I love Lucy. From a character standpoint, from a development standpoint, even though his story got a little bit towards the end, I really enjoyed the characterization and the storyline and the whole 10 years worth of Nick/Lucifer's story. Favorite villain otherwise? Oh, I actually have an answer to that. I'm trying to pull it up from my memory banks. You probably want to edit this part out.
For me, I really like Crowley. Just because he did have also that intriguing character arc where he went from really, really bad to understandably bad. Mm-hmm. You got to admire somebody who creates lines for no other reason than to have people stand in eternal lines. Anybody who's ever been to Disney World can appreciate that. I've often thought it would be fun to just start a line against a blank wall and see how many people just line up, because it must be interesting. There's a line.
I have had that happen with my classes, especially on like the first or second day of class. Someone will stand in a line, or like next to the wall and outside the classroom, and then everybody lines up, and I'm in there alone, and I peek my head out the door. I'm like, you guys don't have to wait here. You can come in. But favorite villain. Like I said, I hate picking favorites. Yeah, I guess I'm just gonna have to go with Crowley. It was, yeah, storyline's great. makes my life in the fandom interesting because people don't believe that that's my name. That's also how I managed to get Mark Shepard to call into my supernatural themed pop culture class I taught during spring of 2020 semester when we were all in shutdown. Yeah, that's my Twitter handle is Professor Crowley, and he was kind of intrigued by that, so he agreed to be a messenger to call in. Yeah, I just.
Well, I mean, after all, he was worth 5 pigs. He could juggle.
Oh yeah, at least. Wonder how many pigs I'd be worth.
I don't know. I am, you know, some questions are probably just better to leave unanswered. But thank you so much for being with me. This has been a lot of fun. As usual, I think we could just sit and talk about this for a lot longer. But thank you, folks, for being with us tonight. This has been the Supernatural Track here on Continual. And my guest tonight has been Michelle Crowley. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin. And I will see you again soon for more love, legend, and lore about Supernatural here at Continual.